Reparation should take the form of total relief of Jamaica's debts to the UK and also the lifting of all visa restrictions for descendants of the formerly enslaved. For over 300 years, Jamaica was colonized by the British government, during which time they enslaved our African ancestors, pilfered our resources, and greatly enriched their country and their people. So what do they owe us for these atrocities? 9.5 trillion US dollars, according to a recent report. The report, entitled Reparations for Transatlantic Chattel Slavery in the Americas, was authored by a team led by a Jamaican on the International Court, Patrick Robinson. It calculates that the UK owes Jamaica approximately US $9.5 trillion, while Spain, which colonized the country for about 150 years before the British, owes about 1 trillion US dollars. It is a well-publicized fact that the British government compensated former slave owners to the tune of £20 million, which at that time, in 1833, was equivalent to 40% of the country's budget. Nowadays, some British people like to tout this notion that it was the British that freed the slaves, it was the British that ended slavery, without mentioning any of the facts surrounding the atrocities committed by that country during and post-slavery. They also don't mention the fact that the government took on such huge debt to compensate former slave owners that it was only able to repay those loans in 2015. 2015 was 8 years ago. They also fail to mention how many of the people in their country today are benefiting from the proceeds of those payments. For example, the BBC reports that the ancestors of former British Prime Minister David Cameron and famous author George Orwell were paid or received direct benefits from these payments. But even as the British government continues to ignore and in some cases deny the call for reparations, there are some descendants of former slave owners who are trying to make things right. Members of the Trevelyan family, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, who were part owners of 6 plantations in the Caribbean island of Grenada, recently traveled to that country to not only formally apologize for their family's role in the slave trade, but to also pay direct reparations. And they did this by making donations to the University of the West Indies and making donations to other charitable causes that would directly benefit the people of Grenada. The Trevelyans are part of a group called Heirs of Slavery, which is essentially an activist group made up of descendants of former slave owners in these former British colonies who are campaigning and lobbying not only for individual families to make reparations, make some kind of reparative justice to the people or to the descendants of the people who were victimized during this period of enslavement, but to also lobby their government to apologize and to take official, formal corrective action for these atrocities. So what should these reparations look like? Well, some people are arguing that it should not take the form of any cash payments to any individual or group. The author of the report, Patrick Robinson, is one of those who feel like the reparation should take the form of overall development, for example, investment in housing, in education, and in other programs that benefit the public as a whole. Barbara Blake Hannah, a Jamaican who is a former TV journalist in the UK and an anti-racism activist, wrote that reparations should take the form of total relief of Jamaica's debts to the UK and also the lifting of all visa restrictions for descendants of the formerly enslaved. She also feels that we should have unlimited access to the educational and economic opportunities that were built on the labor of our ancestors. Now, I don't know what, if anything, all of this will amount to. But what I do know is that the question of whether or not we are owed reparations, we, the descendants of the enslaved, are owed reparations, is undeniable. When it came to paying the slave owners, there was no big debate about compensating them for property. We were considered property. We, people, human beings, were considered property. And there was no long debate about paying them, about whether or not they were owed. So similarly, there should be no long debate about whether we, the victims of their crimes, are owed. As we are talking about this, the British government is busy trying to find ways to get people of the Windrush generation out of their country. The British government is actively trying to prevent the people who lived in their former colonies, the descendants of the people who they colonized, from traveling freely to their country when they lived and pilfered from ours, is mind-boggling. Right? This is happening right now as we are talking about the issue of reparations. It's incomprehensible, and it is undeniably a wrong that should be made right as soon as possible.